Hello and welcome to our Insights podcast, sponsored by Value Edge Group. I'm Leon Herszon, your host, and I have the pleasure to have with me Jeff Zircher, which is an expert on project management offices. So welcome, Jeff.
Hey, glad to be here, Leon. Good to spend some time with you again. Always appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so last time we spoke, you shared a lot about your experience leading the project management office, the PMO at Caterpillar. Let's call CAT, right?
Yep. Big yellow.
Can you share a little bit with our viewers and listeners here the main lessons that you got when you were managing this as an enterprise PMO? So Caterpillar is a very large organization. You have several projects going on in all different sizes and stuff. Share with us a little bit about those best practices that you learned and that you can tell our colleagues here.
Yeah, I'd love to. I probably could fill all the time available with those lessons learned and reflecting on kind of how things went, both good and bad. Our PMO at Caterpillar was a little bit unique in that it was almost like an internal service provider inside of a large company, right? Caterpillar, Fortune 50, 100,000 plus employees. But all of the various organizations inside of Caterpillar had a buying decision to make on where they were going to draw their PMO support from. They could have come to my organization and basically via service charge methodology could purchase PMO services by the hour. They could try to apply PMO rigor and structure on their own, or they could conceivably go outside and buy or contract PMO resources externally. So we were always kind of, singing for our supper, a colleague used to say, trying to make sure that we, added a lot of value, provided a lot of solutions, helped those internal clients, I would call them, deliver on time, on cost, on quality targets much better with our support than they would have without our support. So at a very high level, it was a wonderful model because it really kept us on our toes. We had to perform. We had to have the right people on the bus, right seats on the bus, going in the same direction to really hopefully delight our clients. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the scope and scale of the PMO. We supported, at any point in time, probably 1,500 to 2,000 different projects across the company, every different shape and size. It could have been 20 activities to put a new roof on a building to, 10,000 activities to develop the next generation of a battery-powered mining truck over the course of 3 or 4 years. Everything in between, supply chain, product development, software, procurement, marketing, you name it, we touched it all.
That's a very large amount of projects and diverse, right? Some companies, they have a lot of projects. They're quite similar. They just, you have both. You have not only the quantity, but also the diversity of type of projects, right? If you can look to those projects, right, is there any common trend that you see or common lesson learned that you got after supporting all those projects?
That's a tough one because there was such a large amount of variety and diversity in those projects. And we also supported more iterative, agile type initiatives as well. So think more Scrum Master type PMO roles versus more traditional waterfall roles. I mean, I guess the common theme is that the PMO team member had to really have a high level of emotional intelligence, drive, initiative, the ability to communicate across, different stratas of team members. They really had to be almost like a Swiss Army knife in terms of which skills and capabilities that they would draw on given the particular project or program that they were supporting. So probably lots of other things that were embedded there, but that's the one that kind of comes to mind initially. and it became quite a leadership challenge, not just for myself, but we had a leadership team at, probably 15 or 20 leaders. And we were always kind of examining that portfolio of work and that portfolio of opportunities, trying to make sure we had the right alignment and which leader was responsible for which part of the portfolio based on common themes and styles of projects, or maybe the capability or the talent that they were drawing from. So I always said it was a little bit like playing a game of Tetris. You'd get some new project and you'd look at its shape and its size and how fast it was falling, and then try to figure out where it would fit best in the organization.
Very nice, very nice. So, what would you consider? Now, let's look to the PMO perspective, right? How were you measured? How could you define that you added value? Because you had a very unique situation, and I would say most PMOs, they're established within the organization, they served as that organization, but they don't compete with anything. They don't compete with an external a consulting company. They don't compete with people doing their own stuff.
Yep.
How did you assure value? So you were the selected partner for that project or team.
Well, that's a great question, and you really picked up what I was putting down earlier, and I would offer that prior to the PMO I ran at CAT, kind of really growing in scale to kind of really almost covering the entire enterprise, there was lots of smaller PMOs embedded here and there. Maybe there was a PMO in the engine business, or there was a PMO over in the hydraulics business, or a PMO over in the IT space. And when there wasn't this, again, buying decision where folks kind of had to use the PMO that was in their organization, oftentimes the cost was embedded in overhead. It was part of SG&A. There was not a decision on whether or not an organization would use those PMO services. They just had to.
What is SG&A?
Sorry, selling general and administrative, kind of overhead costs. My apologies there. Mm-hmm. So I just inherently, I felt like the human nature would kick in where somebody said, now, you're saying I got to pay for this, and I don't really have a say-so in how good or not so good the service provider is. I'm not getting a lot of value out of it. And oh, by the way, when times get tough and we want to, cut costs, we just take a big knife to that and peanut butter spread it across the organization, including the PMO. Anyway, it's just really, for me, it was always a flawed model. And so having, back to your question, right? So having to compete against other solutions really made sure that we listened to a lot of voice of customer, gathered a lot of customer feedback, tried to make sure we managed our cost extremely well to where our clients knew. And we would charge on a consumption basis, but we would budget pretty darn accurately on what we thought it was going to take to support projects. So we were always kind of managing to the dollars as well. But the real core of your question is, how do you measure the value that a PMO provides versus not? And I'll be honest, I've been in this space now almost 20 years. I don't know that I've ever come up with or heard of a satisfactory answer to that question. I like to say beauty's in the eye of the beholder on that one, right? And somebody that was on my leadership team a long time ago, 15 years, I remember this when this question comes up. Question was, how do I know that I'm doing better with the PMO than I would have without? And he said, well, if you pick up your smartphone today and you look at that thing and you go, I don't really know how to measure the efficiency I gained from the smartphone, but I can guarantee that I'm more efficient today than I was 15 or 20 years ago when I didn't have this computer in my hand and helping me be so much more efficient in work and in life. So it doesn't really answer your question other than I think that just might be an inherent truth that, well-functioning, high-performing PMOs that help projects get done better, faster, more accurately with their assistance than without should be a safe thing to claim.
So let me ask you this then. One thing that PMI, for instance, the Project Management Institute, have been working very hard is to separate or make a distinction between project management success. So you deliver your project in time, within budget, client is requirements and all kind of stuff, versus project success. The success of the project after it's been delivered, right? In your experience, and you can bring that to today, and we're going to talk about your new role, or not your new role, but you're already there in 1 year. But how do you assure that the PMO, not only at CAT or what you're doing now, but in your experience, how do we assure that the PMO is not just focused on making sure that people follow tools and techniques and etc. For good project management, but at the end of the day, the project fails. After it's been delivered, that's not what the client wanted, is not successful. How do you assure that PMO goes beyond project management and focus on project success, right?
That's a great question. I don't know that I have probably a terribly articulate answer, Leon. There were times probably in both my current role at Burns McDonnell versus my prior role at Caterpillar, where I have observed where we tend to fall so in love with the methodology and the structure and the rigor, yes, that becomes the focus, right, of checking all the boxes and making sure we're following the process and producing all the right artifacts. And while there is value in that, especially at CAT, that became a real pitfall where we wanted to measure the process efficiency to the nth degree. And I would kind of coach my team to say, well, let's take a step back here for a moment. And is the project, is the program going to be successful and deliver the right value and create the right deliverables or whatever the solution is at the end of it? If that gets done better than it would have with the absence of project management rigor, that's the real litmus test. I used to talk about flexibility within the framework, right? At the end of the day, you want to craft a plan, you want to manage your risk, you want to manage your costs and your resources, but there's lots of different ways to skin that cat, right? And still ultimately drive a successful project delivery. So I hope that maybe kind of answers your question. Probably not great, but I love the fact that today there's lots of different methodologies, tools, systems, processes that you can draw from. And at Burns, it's a far different world than at CAT. At CAT, my teams mostly manage time, some financials, a little bit of risk, and then organizational change management and resources. Now at Burns, it's that scope of work is far more complex. It's all that plus sometimes it's safety, it's engineering, it's stakeholder management, it's procurement. And so there's a lot more variables to manage well to ensure the successful delivery of typically a large capital project.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, what you're saying that it's to instill on people's mind to go beyond the processes of managing the project, but keep in mind what is the goal, what the project is trying to accomplish, right? It's not something that you are measuring like, what is the timeline and what is the budget, but it's to make sure that people have in their mind what this project is trying to accomplish, right?
Totally. And that that's going to be different from project to project, but we certainly still would want to deliver a successful project, even in the absence of perfect process conformance, right? And maybe there's some blemishes here, or you get a blind spot there, and certainly you don't want to make that the norm, maybe more the exception, but we'll tolerate a little bit of process deviation if it enables successful project delivery in the end.
Nice. So let's go now to your role. Last time we spoke was more than a year ago, I think, on a previous podcast. And by the way, our viewers, if you are interested, just check it out. It was a very nice conversation with Jeff, and we thought it would be nice to catch up 1 year later to see what happened. So you are already 1 year at Burns McDonnell. And can you already highlighted here a few differences on how you manage projects. Anything else that you can add throughout this 1 year? Your current company is very strong on engineering and construction and capital projects and things like that, which I had the chance to review when I was doing my research, my doctoral research on complex projects. A lot of complex projects are mega projects, are capital projects, which had a lot of complexity, right? So can you share a little bit of what you learned so far in this new environment, different from Caterpillar?
Sure. I mean, lots of newness. Probably was a real shock to the system on how much I didn't know, right? And that's okay, but was kind of initially, that unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. Then you finally migrate towards conscious incompetence. So you start to realize what you don't know. And I'm hoping I'm making progress on becoming more consciously competent. And I know what I know and I need to know. But again, as I kind of compare and contrast at CAT, my client or our client as a PMO was internal other Caterpillar parts of the organization, right? So at the end of the day, you're all on the same team. And
internal client.
Yep. And at Burns, it's a bit different, right? So the external client is a large, maybe it's an airport authority, right? Or a utility, be it power or water or environmental client. So, you've actually got now, I've got exposure now to this. You have external clients that are counting on you to deliver. And what I found really interesting. So at its core, Burns is an engineer, procure, and construct company, right? For typically large scale capital projects. Again, it could be transmission and distribution lines for a utility, could be sanitary for a water company. It could be, again, an airport terminal for aviation type opportunity, et cetera. But what's going on, so Burns is primarily an EPC company, but they also have over 100 years of successfully managing these large mega projects. So we also, even if we aren't doing the construction or we're not doing the engineering per se, Burns still is a great, very credible provider of program management services. So
you oversee the entire thing, not just the construction.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So, from estimating to maybe supplier selection to procurement, you're managing all the different silos and all the seams in between those silos to make sure everything works well together to ultimately deliver this large capital improvement. And so that's been really interesting to be a part of that. And one of the things that I've become most involved in is kind of providing assessments on the front end of some of these large scale projects. So if you think about the environment today, there's this huge windfall of capital investment being put into these types of folks and organizations, these types of clients, right? So it could be, maybe onshoring or reshoring large chip manufacturing, right, which requires a tremendous amount of investment in factories and facilities. You have utilities, be it water or power, that are under pressure to justify rate increases so that they can, revitalize maybe the grid or their capacity or grow their capacity. So these organizations are now tasked with investing $500 million, $1 billion or more in these large capital projects, but may not necessarily have the capability or the capacity to manage that on their own. So oftentimes they'll leverage Burns and what we call a program readiness assessment to conduct kind of face-to-face interviews with a lot of their stakeholders, try to learn and understand what are their strengths, where are their gaps, blind spots, their opportunities, and help them get better prepared to actually deliver these large-scale programs that they're faced with, so that those investments are used efficiently and not wasted.
So the moment that you add external clients, right, your stakeholder management changed significantly than when you are working on internal clients only, right?
Exactly. I joke at Burns that when we were at CAT and we were going to start providing PMO services to call it a new business unit, a new product group, oftentimes that was a 1 hour meeting and a handshake and we got started, right? That's a whole different deal now when you're working external and RFPs.
A lot of meetings and handshakes.
Meetings and handshakes and documentation and responses to RFPs and ultimately contracts. And so that is a whole different ball of wax than what I was used to. So a lot of learning going on for me.
So I'm very curious here. I need to ask you this. You talk about mega projects and stuff. Are you guys, were you guys involved on smart cities, building smart cities?
I don't know that I can answer that question with a lot of credibility, but Burn certainly is doing a lot in that transmission and distribution space around power, which I'm sure has a role in smart cities. Of course, there's the server farms that are popping up everywhere to support all the data needs.
Yes,
which is in our wheelhouse as well. So I probably ought to stop there before I tell any lies, Leon. I'm not quite sure.
No, but thank you. We talk about smart cities, so I also have to ask, since last time we spoke, right? And everybody's following the speed where artificial intelligence is changing everything. So can you tell how you see AI reshaping or impacting the project management profession, even PMOs, or what are you doing? How is AI impacting?
Well, I mean, I think there's many impacts, some good, maybe some not ideal. So, what's the good? Tremendous amount of efficiency, leveraging AI to, I'll say listen in on team meetings or, status meetings and ultimately identifying the necessary action items quickly, the common themes, the documentation that used to take somebody manually keystroking, how did the agenda flow and what all got answered and asked and answered. So those efficiencies are certainly far greater. Of course, being able to leverage AI to help, more efficiently build out project plans and other parts of a program, be a risk register, things along those lines. I think the efficiency gains there are going to be just earth-shattering. Now, it's
amazing, right?
Yeah.
You can ask every now and then when I have a chance and I talk about the use of generative AI, right? And you ask a generative AI, you give a draft of your project, and you ask build a risk register with probability, impact, severity, action plan, contingency plan, and in a minute.
Exactly.
Things that will take hours and hours and a lot of discussion, you have something that we cannot take as is, but man, what you have
might
right
get you
there,
80% of the way there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can make the adjustments. No, this one doesn't make sense. This one makes a lot of sense. I never thought about that. And you have all there, right?
Yep, I totally agree. You said much better what I was saying. The risk I see is, and maybe not specific to those examples, but in general, it's become so easy, right, with these large language models and AI agents to create text, create content. At some point, do we create so much content that people don't have the capacity to read it, to digest it, right? I think we need to really make sure that we're being, my old boss of mine used to say, brevity and clarity. Let's not produce 10 pages of AI generated, artifacts when a half page will do the job, when one page will do the job. So let's just not let our creativity run wild because we have this amazing tool at our disposal to create text or pictures or imagery or you name it. So that causes me a little bit of a concern. But other than that, I wouldn't fancy myself an AI expert by any stretch of the imagination. It is gonna. And you had a great example there, right? Where it's just such a game changer in terms of efficiency. And sometimes the hardest thing in life is to start with a blank sheet of paper and get the first draft down.
Yes.
Well, this makes that a heck of a lot easier to get the first draft out, as we just mentioned. Start to fine tune the rough spots and then just validate it to make sure it's appropriate, and then let's get on with it.
Yeah, on a recent episode, I talked to Andre Barkawi. Dr. Barkawi is an expert on AI. So we have, of all the people that invest time studying this, I'm also not an expert. I read a little bit. I wrote a few things. But I will not say that I'm an expert. But I was talking to him, and his main concern, especially for younger generations, who can do a lot of this stuff much quicker, is how that impacts critical thinking. Because the moment that you skip, that moment that you have to create something and you have to put your minds together, how do you make sure that we are not reducing our capabilities, especially, again, younger generations? In our generation, we are used to, let's do the brainstorming, let's put our mind together, let's work and try to find a solution to a problem, let's read a few books and stuff like that and discuss, and now you have this thing immediately in front of you, right? So, how do we assure that all this benefit does not bring the negative aspect, which is, okay, we don't need to worry about that anymore? And I think I wanted to hear your perspective as well, Jeff, but on my perspective is, yes, it can speed up a lot, but as long as you don't take the output from whatever prompt you put on generative AI as certain, but as an additional input to your thought process and validate critically what is there. Think strategically, not more on a task. I used to say before generative AI, we were more task managers than project managers. Now that generative AI can take care of a bunch of those tasks, we can actually become project managers, more strategic, but we have to be to invest time to be that time that we save. Now we have to invest into. Let's take a look on all those risks.
Yeah.
Let's take a look on all those stakeholders. Let's take a look on all the stuff that is generative AI, this large language model is giving me back, and use our critical thinking to make the decisions, right? So I think it's not lost, but we need to be careful, right? To not over-rely and just accept. That's why every single one of those chatbots, they have at the end, check for information.
Kind of thing.
Exactly, because it can make mistakes, and it does make mistakes. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I love all those points you made, Leon. I agree wholeheartedly. I think you and I probably are lucky we were in this generation, right, where we had to do it the old-fashioned way, right? That created that critical thinking. We stubbed our toe. We made mistakes. We learned along the way, and now we have that in our kind of history and our DNA. But now we've got this very powerful tool at our disposal, so we can meld those two things together, right, and still be able to apply that critical thinking and all that tribal knowledge to what large language models help us do very efficiently. You're right. I am worried for kind of this current generation and future generations where just the answer spits out, and they don't really understand why, right? And I'm very fearful of, you think about, people can snap pictures of a math problem on their phone and it gives them the answer, right? Did they really learn anything? I mean, did we learn in any way how to execute the mathematical process to solve these problems? So, maybe at some point, I mean, in the old days when somebody like you or I was taking typing classes, that's probably not a very good analogy. Trying to think of what it was back in the day. I mean, it's, there's things you have to take as part of your education, and then you
Even doing math, for instance.
never use it the rest of your life. I mean, at some point, do you really need to know math, or is it just your phone will do it for you?
Remember the time where, I don't know if you had that, but when you had to do all your math by hand, and then they came with the calculators and said, "Oh no calculators." This is way beyond that.
Yeah.
This is very simple example. Today, AI is not the same as using with the calculator, not with the calculator.
Right.
It's skipping all the thought process, all the critical thinking, and just putting the answer right there, right?
Yeah. I will. Along this line of thinking, you might recall our colleague Ben Royce, right? And it was at Google. I think he might have moved on now. But when we were in LA for that council meeting, probably 2 years ago now, almost, he was teaching on the side at Columbia, right? And the question came up about students leveraging AI to complete their student staff work,
papers, right? And stuff like that, right?
And he said he was okay with them using AI as long as they provided him the prompt or prompts that were used, which would at least demonstrate they understood the question or the problem they were trying to solve, right? And so I've kind of held on to that a little bit, trying not to be get off my lawn guy and thou shalt not use AI for things, but it's kind of along these lines, right? You still have to have that critical thinking to where you are know enough to be asking the right questions to get AI to help you.
Yeah, and I gave that example exactly. Ben Royce was the one who shared that. When I have a chance, I did at Rutgers Business School, and I do something similar. If you want to use AI, yes, but tell me that you're using. Tell me which chatbot you're using. Show me your prompt and show me the answer to that prompt.
Yep, exactly.
Then we can map if there is the student's brain there, not just a copy and paste of whatever the output is. Right. So AI can help, cannot replace. Right.
Agree completely.
Yeah, thank you.
It's scary times though. We'll have to, we'll sit back with our bag of popcorn and kind of watch this unfold. But no doubt it's going to be a game changer in a lot of ways, hopefully more good than not so good.
Yeah, I believe I'm more on the optimistic side than the pessimistic.
Same.
So in your over 30 years experience with PMOs and projects and programs, what do you think are the main pitfalls, the main mistakes project managers do? I'm not talking about PMOs, but I'm talking about projects overall. What is the main mistake or the top mistakes that you see people making that causes project failure?
I think that's an easy one is people are not transparent and candid when things are going off track, right? So they continue to bring this timeless project update slide to the status meeting that says everything's green, even though they know it's not green and there's problems and nobody wants to go to leadership and say, hey, we're on a bad trajectory here. We need help. Mm-hmm. And so that fear of kind of leading with bad news first, I think is probably the biggest pitfall when it comes to project demise, is that people that continue to expect there's a miracle that's going to happen at some point, right? To get you back on track, whether it's time, cost, you name it. And people aren't, whether it's the project manager that needs to challenge the team, or whether it's the project manager, him or herself, or the project sponsor, there's got to be this level of trust and courage to bring bad news first and to say, hey, Something's troubling here. What are we going to do to fix it? That's
In
my
other
biggest
words,
takeaway.
bad news early.
Exactly. It's the Toyota way, right? I think bad news early, bad news first, and no sense patting ourselves on the back for 50 minutes of a meeting, and then maybe we save the bad news for the last 10 minutes. So,
Yeah.
but that
Very
ultimately, I contend that is not really a project manager's problem. That's often a leadership problem, right? Where
because they don't feel safe to go and share the bad
exactly,
news.
bingo, right, bingo. I mean, it's a cultural leadership thing where leaders, don't crucify the messenger, right, and actually welcome bad news because that's why they're there to help. And and I think life would be a lot better in the situation like that where leaders, in a way, almost welcome bad news so that something can be done about it, as opposed to everything's green, the red's hidden in the closet somewhere until you just can't hide it anymore. And then it becomes a heck of a lot more difficult and expensive to fix.
Very good. Before I let you go, Jeff, one or two books that were instrumental for you in your career or you would like to recommend to our
Sure.
viewers and listeners here?
I'm gonna throw you a little bit of a curveball there, Leon. So real quickly, the two I mentioned last time I think are still very valid, but they were Range by David Epstein and Crucial Conversations. Still those are timeless to me, especially Crucial Conversations. It feel like weekly it comes up, bingo, where a lot of problems both at home and at work can get solved with just throwing more information into this common pool of understanding, so everybody has all the information to hopefully maybe arrive at a common solution. But I'll flip it to a little bit more of a personal, big fan of Peter Attia. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Peter Attia. He's I'll call him a wellness doc now, but he was a doctor in his past life, medical doctor, and still is practicing. But his book Outlive, I read a few years ago, and it's just been a real game changer for me in terms of helping with wellness, eating right, exercise, not just worrying about lifespan, but health span, right? And
Quality of life as well.
and being able to not just grow old, but actually still be able to enjoy life and function and be healthy. So I'm a big fan of the book Outlive and all things Peter Attia. But then if I bring one back to kind of the work world, and from our talks in the past, I'm a big fan of leadership and servant leadership. So the serving leader is always a good one to kind of come back to in terms of flipping that pyramid upside down, right? So where it's not the leader at the top of the pyramid, but you flip it upside down and the leader's at the bottom supporting the whole organization. So those are a couple of my other favorites, and certainly lots more, but I'll stop there and not bore you to death.
Thank you. Final thoughts, Jeff, for our viewers. What would you like to say?
I was thinking about that question before we got together today, and for those that are lucky enough to find themselves in leadership roles in their career, be it PMO leadership or other leadership, that it's really about optimizing people or talent, processes and technology, right? People, process, and tools. And I found that I spent most of my energy, my intellectual capital as a leader, probably 80% of my time and energy was spent on the people side, things that could be attributed to people, right? Whether it was, again, hiring the right people, developing, challenging, smart goal setting, coaching, mentoring. So much of a leader's life really comes back to the people side. So keep that in mind as you're a new leader or an experienced leader. If you're spending a lot of your time on tools, I don't know that that's the right place for it, or even process to some extent. But I agree. People first. And then I always, another former colleague of mine that's retired now used to say, process before tool, right? But he would also say best tool wins. So if you've got a situation in a work world where there's tools out there that kind of do the same thing, people invariably find their way to the one that's the best one, right? Even if it's not the preferred corporate tool, it's some rogue tool that got brought in under the dark of night. People find their way to use the best tool. So keep those things in mind. That's not really any magic there, but people, process before tool. But when it comes to tools, best tool usually wins.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. Really appreciate. Second time's always great talking to you. And I hope we have another chance in some time in the future to recap. Thank you very much.
Love that, Leon. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you too.